Before I move on to the sort of the things about the mayoral elections, I'd like to talk to you about sort of your history with the Communist Party.
Mm-hmm.
And so you went to King Henry VIII Prep School in Coventry, am I right?
Well, I didn't go to the prep school, but I won a governor's scholarship to go to the senior secondary modern school.
Okay.
I didn't come from a well-to-do family. My father was a factory worker, so without a scholarship I couldn't have gone there, but yeah, I did go there.
Okay, and so is that where you got involved with the Communist Party then?
Yes. During the course of the 60s,
Okay.
in the 50th anniversary of the Russian Revolution happened. I was very interested in history. That was quite interesting. And of course, the war against the campaign against the war in Vietnam was really a peak, and it was, you know, part of my youth that people were, I suppose, a bit rebellious in culture and atmosphere, and the school unfortunately didn't take to my organising a Young Communist League sell-in.
I can't imagine they would have, no.
So I was asked to leave.
Oh, wow, okay. Okay, so how did you get from showing an interest in the Communist Party to where you are today, standing in the West Midlands mayoral elections?
Right. Well, I spent most of my life either as a worker, an engineering worker, during the course of which I became heavily involved in trade unions, or as a full-time official for the Transport and General Workers Union. It's now part of Unite, the giant union that Len McCluskey leads.
Yes.
And in that career in the Midlands and then nationally and then internationally, I was heavily involved in representing workers in their interests and concerns, and I particularly specialised in the transport sector. I actually finished up as the president of the European Transport Workers Federation, a 6 million strong body, in which I represented workers' interests at the level of the European Union. So when people said to me, well, this mayoral job will be very much about handling transport, that's right up your street, I thought, well, maybe, why not?
Okay.
But it's primarily, of course, because I disagree really with the setup, with the way that it was been created and managed, really.
Yes, okay. So that sort of makes you stand apart from the other candidates. Is there anything else that makes you sort of think you're in a better position to...
Well, as you know, a trade union official, but also as a... I always think a communist is a socialist who just means what he says. So
yes.
As somebody who's worked very closely with people of all political opinions, and I've actually negotiated with billionaires, you know, I don't necessarily have to agree with them.
Yes, yeah.
To be able to have a relationship with people. It seemed to me that what's quite distinctive about our position is we don't really agree with the neoliberal agenda that's dominated politics for 30-odd years. You know, the line that says, there's no money, we're all in it together, we've got to be careful about what we do. It all seems to be code for ordinary people putting up with things and suffering, and, you know, what have we seen? Student grants abolished, you know, how people can't afford mortgages, generation rent, they call people in their 30s, because they're stuck in between a rock and a hard place. They can't get a mortgage, they can't get a house. Council housing stopped and destroyed. The National Health Service attacked and destroyed. The great answer of New Labour was to borrow money off the private sector and then let them have the hospital after they'd finished with it. Well,
so you're saying that sort of you'd focus on young people, wouldn't you?
Yeah, sure.
So what apart from that, what else do you think makes the Communist Party relevant in the 20th century? Because I suppose
obviously sometimes we've had a bad press.
I can admit that. Yeah.
But you know, many political positions have their difficulties. I mean, I promised not to bring up the position of leading Tory politicians who are still with us, who thought that how Nelson Mandela should be hung as a terrorist. People don't say to me, well, you're responsible for things that happened in 80 years ago. Or you know, when I was hardly born. You know, this is ridiculous. What the Communist Party's position is it's become, I think, really remarkably of great interest after the crash of 2008, when, only a year or two before we were being told by important people that capitalism had ended crises, that it had solved the problem of hunger and disease. And here we are in an absolute mess. Capitalism's repeated concurrent crises, mass unemployment, the need for a reserve army of labour, it shows that nothing has changed. And
Okay.
In fact, the system is teetering on the edge of a crisis.
So have you seen, since the crisis of 2008, more of an interest in the Communist Party?
There has been, yes. I understand that mainstream capitalist publishers started reprinting the manifesto of the Communist Party of 1848, written by Marx and Engels,
Yes.
and they sold out in Germany because people
They did,
wanted
actually. I
to
remember
read
reading
what
that.
seemed to be an extraordinary prescient set of comments about the way in which capitalism, then strong and vibrant and setting up empires all over the world, you see it at the other edge of the parabola of decline. Now, Marx's comments increasingly seem to be of some importance and not something to be consigned to the past.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if we move it away from the sort of global communist and then move it back to the West Midlands mayoral elections, if you were elected, what would be the main policy, the main thing that you strive for, that you'd want to put in place?
Well, the way they've rigged the system, the mayor really isn't responsible for very much at all. I don't understand why. Some candidates are talking about issues which the mayor doesn't even have responsibility for. Public transport is the main responsibility that the mayor will have when it's only a 3-year term of office.
Yes.
So even if things do change down the line, it's got to be that. And all candidates have agreed, I think, that the issue of air quality is so terrible in the conurbations of the West Midlands and towns, such as the wrong main streets. Something's got to be done. I think the difference is what should be done. The right-wing parties talk about jollying up the bus and train companies and asking them to do nice things and giving them lots of money so that they can develop things. The more centre-left parties are talking about regulation. Now, I know quite a bit about this because as the head of transport for the Transport and General Workers Union, I had to cope with developing a policy on the bus industry after Labour dropped its commitment to public transport.
Yes,
And the
okay.
only candidate who argues for public ownership of local bus and tram companies, as it happens, the tram is coming back into public ownership because basically a bad job has been done and a better one can be done. But the bus company is still National Express, a giant transnational corporation dominating everything. Essentially, we were told that buses would be privatised so that the state wouldn't have to pay so much money keeping them going. Well, they're still paying money.
Yes.
But this time it's not the public monopoly, it's a private monopoly. And, people like Brian Souter and others who dominate the bus industry are being paid large sums of money to run what should be a public service at a rate of profit that really is exorbitant. And I'd like to bring them back into public ownership so that local people can determine for local needs.
Okay, and so you mentioned there the other candidate's stance on transport in the West Midlands. It's quite interesting that you weren't invited to the the final mayoral debate. Why do you think they didn't invite you, and how did that make you feel?
That's a particular set of hustings.
Okay.
I've actually been over the past 6 weeks almost every evening to some sort of hustings or debate, or invited to some sort of a grouping, civil society groupings.
Yes.
Ordinary people have been very friendly. I don't actually quite understand this West Midlands Elects, which seems to have been set up by the Combined Authority in alliance with a communications company that actually has contracts.
Okay.
Seems to be very odd. Now, this setup seems to be of the belief that simply because we don't have local representation, the Communist Party hasn't contested elections really significantly for many, many years.
Yes.
It's a new step for us, and it's largely the alternative vote system that has attracted us.
Okay.
And so the argument that, oh, well, we don't have to invite you because you aren't very important, is hardly very democratic, but I actually think it probably conflicts with quite a number of regulations, especially if it's a news media organisation, a communications organisation.
Yes.
We'll come back to that after the election, but for now, I think it was disgraceful not to be invited. The Birmingham Evening Mail even doctored their website to add my photo to look as if I had been invited. Well, I hadn't.
Ah, okay. So you mentioned sort of the Communist Party, and I want to ask about the general election, which is coming up on June the 8th.
Yeah.
Is there anyone standing in the local area for the Communist Party? And if you don't succeed in the mayoral elections, will you consider standing?
No, we've actually discussed this last weekend, and we've taken a conscious decision that we will not be contesting the general election, mainly because we think that this snap election has been called in a way to undermine democracy and scrutiny. That the Tories really need removing. The only way we can see that affected is by campaigning for a Labour government, and we're in favour of that.
Yes.
So we're not standing against Labour candidates anywhere, not standing anywhere at all. We're calling for a maximum turnout for Labour, and the more people that vote in as many constituencies as possible, the better. Forget this tactical voting nonsense. It's all about numbers now. We want to see a maximum vote for Labour.
Yes.
But we will continue to campaign in the West Midlands. We've said that another undemocratic stumbling block was put in our way. We had to get 100 signatures of people and to allow us to stand, and £10,000 to be able to effectively contribute to the campaign. That's ridiculous.
Okay.
There's only 10 signatures and £500 for a parliamentary seat. What on earth's going on there? Well, it was stitched up. But what we're going to do is, if we save our deposit, which some opinion polls are suggesting, over 5%, and I have to say the reaction to the arguments that I've been putting in the media and at hustings has been phenomenal. Absolutely great interest indeed. Then what we said we would do is to set up a war chest with that, to work with tenants associations, campaign groups in localities, to hold the mayor and his acolytes to account. The leaders of the councils, the 7 boroughs, who have participated in this charade, this fog of government, to create a new set of bureaucracy that is impossible for us to oversee. Well, we'll hold any elected mayor to account. If they said they were going to do this and then they do that, well, we'll campaign against them.
Yeah, and I read in the Communist paper, the Star, that you called the mayoral election a stitch-up.
It is.
Yeah, why did you say that?
Well, the agreement, the devolution agreement, was arrived at without proper public debate, open debate, in which a real consultation could take place.
Yeah.
And it was essentially a deal done by local politicians with the now departed Chancellor of the Exchequer, 5 Jobs Osborne. And each conurbation, what we had was a different outcome, because he could get away with greater or lesser. And in the West Midlands, I think the local politicians were so desperate to collaborate with what is essentially a little plot. They won't get really very much extra money. What will happen is that they'll be expected to administer central government cuts, Tory cuts, and they're mostly Labour councils.
Yeah.
So these Labour councillors have done a deal with a stitch-up, I think, with the Tory central government, to enable them to carry on ruling in the West Midlands, but implementing Tory policies.
Okay, you mentioned Labour there, and I presume you've seen the polls about the general election. Labour on course for a disastrous defeat, but if they do lose disastrously, how damaging will that be for the left in British politics?
Well, there are quite a lot of polls. There's about 48 polls been published, and all I ever seem to see are the ones that promote the fact that there's supposed to be a 20-point gap. There's several that pointed much lower gaps. And of course, we all know how polls give us kind of indication, but they don't necessarily tell us exactly what happens.
Yeah, in the last year we have seen that, yeah.
There's everything to play for. It's down to the people. Clearly, a Tory government is going to be disastrous. But I think the reason they called this election is that they're less strong than they'd like to create. It's a bit like the old Wizard of Oz.
Okay, create the illusion of strength almost.
Really, there's a bit of scrabbling about to try to manage to keep things on even Stevens. It's not exactly straightforward. So we obviously, the left does need to reconsider its position. Right across Europe, there's actually been a collapse in confidence for traditional social democratic politics. A rise for the right. It very much echoes the early 1930s, and the worries about that have to be enormous. But actually, in the French presidential elections, which we just saw, people saying, it's a fight between the fascist and the moderate. Well, actually, 4 candidates were bunched around the 20%, and it just so happened to be at the last minute that's the way the 2 leaders pulled away for the final poll for the second round. But there was a massive surge of support for a broad left candidate, which French communists were heavily engaged in supporting. So I think it is possible that just as in the 1930s, people sometimes talk nostalgically about the 1930s. I'm a little bit of an amateur historian.
That's interesting. I do history at Warwick as well.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I write a column for the Morning Star on its, on this day, 80 years ago. It means I have to read the newspapers both today and 80 years ago all the time. Make sure I don't get mixed up. What's interesting is the commonality, is that it took most of the 30s for people to wake up to the fact that fascism leads to war, that capitalism makes profits out of war. And the left generation that merged from that, and that was the foundation for post-war reconstruction in Britain and prosperity, wasn't arrived that easily. It's about struggle. I was the only candidate to speak to the Unite Against Fascism rally against the English Defence League, the Nazi organisation that targets young Asian women. I was present when that rather famous picture was taken of a young Asian woman facing down a thug.
That one that took over.
He was defending a young woman who was wearing a scarf, a mark of respect for her culture and background. That has to be opposed.
That actually brings me on to my next question, because you've said that one of your major points would be to promote racial harmony, equality and solidarity if you're elected.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how would you do that if you were elected?
Well, I tell you, one of the things that really bothers me is the way that ordinary people are cut off from politics. They're not involved. Particularly young people, are suspicious of politicians. I think we need to create a new kind of engagement. And had we had a proper political discussion amongst the citizens of the West Midlands about what kind of devolution we wanted, I would have been arguing, as I have been in this campaign, for organic connections with citizens' organisations, with pensioners' groups, church groups, youth groups. I'd like to set up a youth parliament in every borough where there's a proper formal connection.
I mean, I suppose we can move on to the role of universities. So obviously in the West Midlands there's good universities such as Warwick and Coventry. How would you sort of plan on bringing them into sort of the West Midlands sort of debate?
Well, I think it's very important that we get back to the idea that education is good for its own self. Education is a good thing. Knowledge is a good thing. That the role of the intellectual in society is important. It needs to be preserved. The art and culture and science are great things. They're not routes to something else. And unfortunately, universities over the past 30 years seem to have been churning out ever more variants of accountants and lawyers and God knows what else. All of which seem to be about administering the system, making the system work. I'd like people to be able to go to university to study something because they like to do it, because they're interested in it. And, good things come from that. One of the things, you see in life is you say, there's that strange dichotomy. The teacher says, "Oh, you must study this. You've got to get that. You've got to get this exam. You've got to get that grade. You've got to do this or the other." And then you say to the teacher, "Well, why will I want that? My granddad says nobody ever had ever asked him this question. Oh no, you need to do it because it's about processes." Okay. Well, I think we need to make education applied. I think we need to make it pointful in terms of the way that it connects with society. And we need to end the difference between town and gown. We need to get ordinary people and university students and lecturers together much more. And if we do have, as I've been arguing and others have, but I hope I've argued a better way of doing it, reindustrialisation for the Midlands, it's going to be a different kind of industrialisation. It's going to be, I've heard nobody say manufacturing is going to be about printing. It's going to be about printing goods. Britain has got this incredible reputation for design, for skill, for the quirky thought, from Isaac Newton, who was a weird oddball, who thought the very strange notion of gravity, it was one of the more sensible of his weird ideas, to the present day. I'm sure that there are young people out there who would dearly love to translate their skill and their aptitude into something real. And what we need is connections. We need to build small businesses and technology-driven individuals with those brain boxes who can come up with the weirdest of ideas, a different way of doing something better, which I think Britain has been, noted for over the centuries. And I reckon the emerging economies like China and India, which I've had, quite a bit of dealings with, I think they respect and admire that. And that's what we can sell. So universities need to be, I've been to many of these hostings where they've been sponsored by companies. The giant transnational corporations have begun to see universities as a place where they get the people they want. Okay.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, go. I thought the line had gone again. That's the technology for you.
I was just being obedient. You said.
Okay, so talking about students, what advice would you give to students at university or at secondary school who want to get involved sort of in the local area and local politics?
Yeah, one of the obvious things about modern politics is that it just doesn't reach the parts that it used to do.
Yes, yeah.
It's difficult for me, in my generation, I'm a product of the radical 60s, to kind of get it. But I knew something new was happening when I saw those marches against the Iraq War. And I saw 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds wandering along, in a 2 million march, and then a huge gap. Nobody, much over 20. And then, people of my age, people in their 60s or 50s then, now 60s and 70s.
Yes.
And the few of us have, as it were, kept a radical, independent, liberal-minded spirit, have to be massively encouraged by the new mood, what's called the millennial mood. But millennials are not natural joiners, I think, whereas, in our society, although we were we were challenging the old guard, the people who had respect for the monarchy and, the army, everything was regimented or whatever, and we wanted something a bit different. But there still was that sense that mass organisation meant, a specific form, a specific structure. And it's very clear to me, particularly with the extraordinary interest that we've had in the Communist mayoral campaign on social media, that young people think in a different way.
Okay.
One of the things that I've been quite encouraging of our youth organisation, the Communist Youth Organisation, is to try to work with local trade unionists and student unions in particular towns where they develop a broad connection between people in, crap employment, the McDonald's type employment. And instead of thinking it's about getting people to join that union or this union or organise in a particular way, just get people aware and conscious. So I think it's about saying surprise yourself by being open. You'd be surprised. Some of us old fuddy-duddies sometimes have quite strange ideas.
No, an idea that's been bounced around is giving 16 and 17-year-olds a vote. Is that a thing that you'd support?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I remember the campaign the Young Communist League had when I was a member of it to get votes at 18, votes, you had to be 21 to vote when I was young. And, that was a very successful campaign. And we much influenced opinion inside the Labour Party about this. And because there was that mood, that changing mood, amongst young people in the early 60s, I think it was reduced. And I think a similar thing is happening now, but the political parties are very sort of calculated about it, about what they do. They only want to do it if it suits them. It's like their attitude to proportional representation. PR is great when we're small and we haven't got many MPs, but when we got big parliamentary parties, no, hang on, that's too dangerous. No, votes at, if you can join the army, if you can marry, if you can, do all these things, live on your own at the age of 60, you should be able to vote.
Yeah. Now, I know a lot of people my age and younger who traditionally would vote Labour, but would vote Conservative in this election. So how would you get young people interested in the left and back again interested in sort of Labour and communism?
Well, I think Jeremy Corbyn has done a really good job in this respect.
Yes.
It's not just him, and there are people who've tried to associate him with the Communist Party. He has written for the Morning Star in the past. It's just, Jeremy, I think it's just part of that milieu on the left. Those of us who are refugees from the 60s, Bernie Sanders in the United States,
yes.
A senator, man greatly respected, but who has said very unusually in America, that he's a socialist, extraordinary thing. Very nearly won the Democratic nomination for presidency. If the stitch-up that existed in the Democratic Party hadn't existed, an undemocratic position, Jeremy Corbyn, not once, but twice, because people are so frightened of him. They and his ideas, the ideas he represents, that they have tried to undermine him. But he won again. Why? What's going on? I think there has been a sea change in politics. But the problem is, because of this rather, I suppose, almost anarchic approach of the millennials, of the young people, of anybody under 35, really. Yeah. It's difficult to concentrate it, to mobilise it. But I think it was Engels, Marx's great collaborator, who likened the British working class to a sleeping giant. Yes. There's going to be, I think, a moment, maybe not tomorrow, maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years' time. But I think when the critical mass of, if you like, the Thatcher's children, people who came up, who were brought up during the terrible times, the defeats, the miners' strike, and whatever. Somebody leaving university in 1984 will have a fixed view in their head. Well, I'll only get on if I keep my head down, if I don't cause trouble, if I don't associate with other malcontents, if I don't express radical ideas. But I think when you saw what happened in the Iraq War, and then you see student loans, and then you see all the goodies in society, all the good things taken away from you and excluded unless you collaborate, I think there's going to be a bit of a revolution, to be honest.
Okay, predicting a revolution. No, that's interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that's all I've got time for, unfortunately. But thank you very much for talking today.
Great. That's fantastic.
Brilliant. Thanks, Graham. Thank you.
Then.